you grow up with a NES, PlayStation, Star Wars, cartoons, and 80s TV? Do you like to think who would win in a fight between Batman and the Master Chief? Comics, games, movies, music, and TV, they're gonna tell you everything you need. Superheroes or not, they got your back. They're gonna save the world of geeks. Games, movies, music, and TV, they're gonna tell you everything you need. Superheroes or not, they got your back. They're gonna save the world of This Week in Geek. This Week in Geek.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to Loose Cannon, only on ThisWeekInGeek.net. I'm your host, Mike the Birdman Dodd, but I'm not alone as I trek through the hollowed halls of the foregone video stores of yesteryear. I am joined by the man in the city of Kitchener, formerly known as New Berlin.
That's right. Alex, the producer. What are you trying to say? Am I supposed to be in, like, trouble for living in New Berlin?
No, I just think it sounds cool.
It is kind of cool. I mean, it was that, until about 100 years ago.
So a little bit of local history if you happen to know where we are broadcasting from in Canada. So yes, guys, we are here on the second episode, though the first proper episode of the Loose Cannon podcast. If you happen to miss the first episode, a very brief summary of what we do here is we are here to celebrate, not necessarily tear down, movies from yesteryear and recently that may have gotten a theatrical release, a direct-to-video release that maybe have gone underappreciated in the years, or maybe have some cultural significance thereof, or we may be celebrating a particular action star, genre, or something. So, if you heard our first episode where we talked about the Asylum and the Sharknado franchise, we are going to be talking about a more broad topic, but we're going to talk about something very, I would argue, very important to the 1980s action genre. We're going to be talking about the Cannon Film Group's movie, American Ninja, featuring Michael Dudikoff, who's a name you probably recognize if you are any kind of a film nerd. You've heard the name, you may know he's associated with the American Ninja franchise, but you may not necessarily know his face, but you know that name, Dudikoff, though I don't know why you would know that. His name was often associated with the Expendables, but those things just never came together, though he was always open to the idea from what I understand.
Yeah, he started out as I was going to say standard, like regular dramatic actor in the very beginning, and then quickly moved over into the action kung fu films because they're like, it turns out he could actually do some kung fu. And that was at a time when they're like, wait, we want that. The ninja craze had started because of some of the stuff that Chuck Norris had done in the late 70s after Bruce Lee had already passed. And the Enter the Ninja movie was a huge hit. I think that was 81 or 82. And that, like, they had made ninja movies in the past, but like that was what like opened the floodgates with all the kids wanting to see ninja stuff. And this predates Ninja Turtles bringing the craze out too. So they come out with American Ninja, and this is Cannon Films' first, I would say, big action hit that wasn't Chuck Norris.
Yeah, because like this is one of these movies that I don't have a lot of super familiarity with. I've seen it twice now as research for this show, but I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a video store I used to go to in Owen Sound. I think it was called Gamma Video. It might have been called something else, but I remember going there in high school, and I would always pass by this big white VHS box, and it had this American flag on it, this ninja, and this guy crouching on it, and it's just in big white letters, American Ninja. And it was just one of those staples of the video store that I never paid much attention to. And as I got into this whole internet personality thing back in 2007, I've seen a number of people talk about it on YouTube, on Twitter, and everybody again makes the same stupid jokes, the same stupid commentary on it. And it wasn't until me and Alex started talking about doing a film podcast, because me and Alex like stupid movies, but we also like to celebrate them. Tearing something down is fun, but it's a little tropey. Everybody does the same thing over and over again. So watching
It's been
this,
played to death since 2007.
yeah, like
Let's be real. The internet critic that just hates everything it's got 15 years now of just being played to death.
Yeah, like it's angry for the sake of being angry. And I think it's time to celebrate some of this, because I think American Ninja shows a lot of legs despite not being a very good movie. But I think it's set a lot of
fun. It's a fun movie for the time.
Yeah. I think it shows its influence in other media moving forward, because you see a lot of action movies take its cues from it. Like, I remember, and I think of this specifically because of The Simpsons, where they make fun of dumb action movies with like McBain and all this stupid crap.
Well,
or
if you look at when this came out, before this, you had the Chuck Norris movies were starting to get popular. They were slower moving. They still felt like 70s movies, where they hadn't quite got the fight choreography down. The idea of doing these fast cuts, the MTV cut, nothing lasting more than a few seconds, or even like, I think 2 seconds is the max that they do for most action movies now. That hadn't really been established yet till around this movie came out. Because this movie came out in 85, meaning it was filmed in 84. So Arnold hadn't become a hit yet, because at that point, he had just done Conan. When this was being filmed, Terminator was being filmed and was coming out. Same goes for Conan the Destroyer. So Arnold hadn't done Commando yet. Like this was being produced at the same time. So it's not like this was a ripoff of the big Arnold or the big Stallone movies, because Stallone was still doing, for the most part, like dramatic roles, that had some action in them. And so you really just had Chuck Norris, that was the big action star at the time, that had been doing these and Dudikoff comes in, no formal martial arts training, gets trained for the movie, and does a competent enough job that he ends up making a career out of doing these things.
Yeah, and even today, Dudikoff has kept out. He's taken Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think he trains with some world-class people. So he's kept up with it over the years. I mean, like, he just had a movie last year where he played like the lead bad guy.
And I mean, he's in his 60s. He's like 65 or something now. He's still doing it.
Yeah.
And if you look, so the basic plot is, we can go over. It's a pretty simple plot. Guy with amnesia works for the military, gets in trouble because he doesn't want to play by their rules, and tries to stop an evil ninja group from training, I guess, militant terrorists.
Well, from basically there are these ninjas known as the Black Star Ninjas, and they're stealing weapons to sell to this warlord who's selling them off to the highest bidder. There is a corrupt colonel.
Very, very, very typically evil. Where we thought it was like South America, but it's actually the Pacific.
Yeah, it's like
an evil Pacific Islander. I guess like drug czar.
Yeah, he's named like Ortega or something, and Michael Dudikoff's character, Private Joe Armstrong, I think it is, rescues the colonel's daughter. He gets in good. The rest of the army doesn't like him because he's like, "You're an asshole. You don't talk to anybody. You're too quiet.
You need to be part of the team. You need to be part of the team. You need to be part of the team. I'll teach you a lesson and beat you up because you're not part of the team," and use some colorful language. And then he beats them up, and they're like, "We respect you now," because it's the 1980s.
And then it's eventually revealed that the girl he rescued in the beginning of the movie is turns out her dad is working with the bad guy Ortega to steal these weapons, and it leads to a big confrontation at this drug czar's place. But before that happens, because as we mentioned, Michael Dudikoff's character is in amnesiac. He meets the guy who raised him, who was a lost Japanese soldier from the Second World War, trained him in the art of ninjutsu. It turns out they had been missing each other for years. And he's like, "I will complete your training." So in a very quick montage, he learns the rest of his ninja moves. He gets the aforementioned American Ninja outfit, and he goes and kicks people's asses. And At one point, Dudakov's master, I can't pronounce the character's name, I think it's Shinyuki, I think, actually does ninja magic where like he vanishes.
Oh, yes. It's never described. He is in front of them, and we're not talking, he doesn't throw a smoke bomb. He just goes, ha! And he just fades out into the air.
Yeah, he just like, boop, gone. And it's so...
And they're like, where is he? And they don't address that. And we're watching, we're going, wait. So when does he learn how to do ninja magic? No, we're just not going to talk about that. He just has ninja magic.
Yeah, so Dudakov is fighting all these dudes. They're obviously pulling the commando thing where they shoot at him and they can't hit him, whatever. And then eventually the colonel and everybody else leads the assault on Ortega's base. The colonel dies and the daughter's like, oh no, daddy. Ortega takes the daughter hostage. Dudakov rescues her from a flying away helicopter, lands her on top of a building. One of Dudakov's army buddies uses a rocket launcher, blows up the helicopter, and then the movie just ends. Just like that. It just ends within like seconds of the helicopter exploding.
Yeah, it blows up and it's like, you're safe now, end.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
It doesn't get the girl. It doesn't even show what's happening. It was like, we ran out of budget, end.
Yeah.
And the movie cost $1 million, which sounds like nothing now, obviously. But at that time, when you were filming overseas, that $1 million would be like getting a $20 million budget now for what you needed to have done. So like a low budget theatrical action film, like a la, I guess, John Wick, first one, that sort of idea. But, different time period, obviously. And then it ends up making like 11 times its budget in North America alone. So it was the huge hit for them. Like, you'd be like, $10 million isn't a hit. $10 million is a hit when you only spent $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So, and back then, advertising budgets weren't as huge either. So that was word of mouth spreading.
Yeah, like the only other movie that had a similar budget that hit just as big that I can think of, not a canon movie, but it was a New Line Cinema movie, Nightmare on Elm Street, had a similar budget. And it made its money back huge. So back then, if you were really creative with your money, you could pull off some amazing stuff.
And, fun fact, this was supposed to be a Chuck Norris movie because it was a canon film and he had signed that multi-year deal. He didn't want to cover his face for the scenes, apparently.
Yeah, so he's like, yeah, nope. And then the fight choreographer said, I can train him. He's very athletic to begin with. Let's give him a shot. And Dudakov obviously pulled it off. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be like flip kicking like John Wick or Bruce Lee or anybody like that, but he looks competent in what he's doing. He fights with like a variety of different weapons. I don't even think he uses a gun. I think he's primarily just melee and maybe swords every so often.
And steely stares, stare at people, and give him a look like I'm going to be advertising in a magazine.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things, I think one of the big takeaways from American Ninja is it gave rise, in my opinion, to a lot of tropes that a lot of action movies would do after. I see a lot of people copying this throughout the 80s.
And it ended up having multiple sequels, which we'll probably end up doing another special, not individually on it, but like on them as a whole. The American Ninja 2, Confrontation, American Ninja 3, Blood Hunt. I believe he left for that one.
Yeah, and then
was it he came back.
I think he comes back for the fifth one. I think it's just
he comes back for the fourth one and then leaves again.
Yeah.
So yeah, and each one of those were theatrical, I believe, until the fifth one came out, where it didn't have him at all. But like that was a successful enough franchise to do that. There was also sort of semi-sequel or spin-offs that came out based on it. But you can sort of attribute this film to the rise in the American action star. It was happening right around the same time. Had some slightly different events happened, you probably would have been seeing Dudakov listed in the same pantheon as like Arnold. Honestly, like there was no reason why he couldn't have been. It just might have been charisma. He probably didn't have quite as much at the beginning. He was a better actor than Arnold was back then. Regardless, it's just some people wanted to see the giant, huge, muscly dude, and this guy was like, he's just in really good shape as a regular dude.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to look at his career as a whole, I remember Dudakov from this, but I remember seeing him in, I think it was Bachelor Party he did with Tom Hanks back in the day, and then he has done some other ones that you might have seen or we would have heard of. Basically, Avenging Force, Uncommon Valor were two of his sort of bigger roles, and I remember him most from the 90s TV show that ran and probably reruns forever, which was Cobra. It ran for 22 episodes from 93 to 94, and it's basically American Ninja who's also Magnum PI working for a secret government agency.
I haven't seen it, but you've shown me the intro to it.
Yeah, and his boss in it is the principal from Back to the Future.
Oh, Principal Strickland, yeah.
Yeah. And it's from that era of The Equalizer, all those sorts of things. He got his own show that way, and it ran for the 22 episodes, which meant that it was in reruns forever. Because remember, in Canada, we would get a show that would come out and they would be like, well, that show's going to be shown for the next 5 years with the few episodes that it has, which is why we always end up sometimes thinking about shows from the past. We're like, that show was on forever, and you find out it only had like 20 episodes.
Yeah, because in Canada, like, it would air on Global TV, YTV, or any of the syndicated networks up here usually on like a Friday or Saturday night, or their Saturday afternoon death slot, stuff like that. Like, you'd see these things repeated endlessly. One of the things that I think American Ninja did is it influenced a lot of plot lines. Like, in my opinion, like you see the drug czar, the corrupt army dude, ninjas, like I said, were a big thing. Like, everybody had martial arts training past 1985 in like most bad guy movies.
Well, yeah, it was all, and the same plot. It was either the person has amnesia, who happens to be a martial arts master for no reason, or it has trained by an old sensei who was actually an enemy of the states, but then learned to love America because of the person he was training. Mm-hmm. Or you have the traditional Colombian, South American, or Pacific Islander drug dealer who's the bad guy, or are potentially like general who's trying to take over a small country. This was sort of one of the originators of that. This is what really popularized that. Like, when you think of a ninja with the ninja garb,
you think of this.
Whereas if you play any modern video game where they show what ninjas would have actually looked like, they don't wear that garb. It was they wore it for a certain films back in like the 70s when you started seeing them show up in Japanese films. But if you look at traditional ninja and samurai movies, that's not what they look like. But that is the quintessential ninja black garb with the hood up and everything. That originates pretty much in the Enter the Ninja movie and this film, both canon films. Mm-hmm. So you can thank these films for being what popularized every video game and cartoon adaptation of what a ninja looks like from like 1985 to 2000.
Absolutely. Like, it's kind of fun to look back on this movie. And like I said, it's not a very good movie, but it's entertaining for what it is, just to see where its legacy is kind of wild its kind of way through. I kind of wish I knew if any other directors were influenced by this movie.
I'm sure that there were martial artists that were coming up. At this point, you had Van Damme starting out, because even though Bloodsport came out in 1988, it was actually filmed in 85.
Him and Dudikoff would have been a fight I'd pay to see.
The difference was Dudikoff wasn't a martial artist, so they would have had to really practice it at the beginning. He wasn't really doing martial arts himself until competently enough until the 90s. Mm-hmm. They did a pretty darn good job of the fight choreography here to hide that fact. But by the time he finished with this franchise, he was doing all the stuff, pretty much on screen. Actually, his athleticism was on point here, because there's parts where he's like free running or jumping up buildings and stuff. They're not cutting away the camera, and it is like not like super wide or super close. It's medium shot, so you can see it's him doing it, where he's like jumping up into the rafters or moving around. That's legitimately him doing it. There wasn't a stunt double hired to do that crap.
Yeah, and that's something that I generally appreciate about him, is the athleticism that he brought to the role. I mean, even the stuff when he's doing against the truck, obviously I'm sure there was like some kind of safety person on set.
Oh yeah.
But it looks good. All things
Wait,
considered.
I'm sorry. It's a Golem Globus production for them. There's probably no safety guy on set. The safety person is probably whoever was working catering, who was also the medic in quotes.
Oh God.
They got away with a lot of stuff back then because they filmed these movies fast and loose, and they did amazing things because they were just like, they knew how to push people to get the best out of them for the budgets they had. Because you think with $1 million budget they had enough of a stunt team together to do this? They're probably just like looking for actors, and they're like, hey, Dudikoff, you're willing to learn martial arts? Yes. You willing to jump off a truck? Yes. Okay, you got the movie.
Cool. I mean, I'm glad that I saw this movie just because I've always, like I said, I've always seen the box in movie or in video stores kind of growing up, and
it was something that all my friends talked about that I only ever saw bits and pieces on TV, and it was, I feel you're in the right age category for it, but I was a little bit young for this film to be as influential. Van Damme was the big martial arts star when I was, let's say, like 7-8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He was the big star at that point. And Seagal had sort of, he wasn't doing quite as much like martial artsy stuff as he did in the early films he did at that point. But like 95 to 2000, where I would have really started getting into this stuff, Dudikoff was doing stuff, but it was mostly direct to video. So if I wanted to go to a theater to see a martial arts movie, it was
always Van Damme. Yeah.
It was pretty much Van Damme until, around 2000. So, when, if you were to show me this, I would have been like, oh, I'd rent it. It's just, we had finite resources for rentals back in the day.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things where I always saw it, always wanted to rent it. But every time I would go to rent it, it was like, oh, Van Damme's, Street Fighter came out, or The Quest, or Maximum Risk, or Time Cop or Sudden Death. It's like every time I went to go get it, because I would rent movies at my grandparents, unless it was like a rent 3 deal, it usually was, I was like, okay, well, I'll get whatever was in theaters that I couldn't see. Whereas, because I always thought like, oh, this movie will show up on TV. Little did I know they would have had to cut a fair amount of stuff, because while this movie doesn't have like nudity in it, it does have a fair amount of pretty graphic on-screen violence. Like, you don't see a lot of films of the era where they show the stabbing, where it goes, the penetration of the stab. And in this one, it shows like the sword going through the person. And it was kind of surprising, because usually back then it would be like off screen, or it would be like you'd see them to go stab somebody with a sword, and then it would just show like their face, their reaction. It's like, no, they did a pretty good job with the makeup effects in this. And it's also from before the time where, like I said, they did all the quick cuts. So when they're doing it, it's like stabbing in real time. You're like, ooh, even though it's not as bloody as you might have seen in like more modern films, you see it go in, you're like, that looks like it hurts bad.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm glad that we got Michael Dudikoff as an action star, as, like I said, he has a very long resume of material. He's actually done stuff for video games, not many, but he's done a couple. He's always stayed active. I did a little bit of lurking on social media.
Yeah.
Evidently he's a very friendly guy in real life.
Is he on Cameo? Can we get him to say something?
I tried to find him. I did, actually. I may actually reach out to his representation, because it's COVID. What are you doing right now? I promise you nothing.
We should watch a few more of his things, watch his TV show, and then, maybe do an interview with him if we can.
Yeah.
I feel like he would be down to earth enough to do that and just, explain his career, because I feel like a lot of the younger generation, if you were born after like 95, you probably never heard of him unless you saw an internet meme or something.
Yeah, because like everybody has seen that box cover, but you don't know where it's from.
Well, and if you're born after 95, when would you have seen it? Because you were like in 2005, video stores were still a thing, but
most of their VHSs were being phased out.
Well, and you'd be hard pressed to find a Dudikoff DVD in a rental store unless it was a private rental store at that point.
Yeah, like you wouldn't find them in a chain.
He never had that. He didn't get that renaissance. He didn't get that. Like Van Damme got that Expendables 2 movie where he got to shine again and come back into the big screen. Even Seagal got to do Machete. Like Dudikoff didn't get that role, even though there had been rumors, I think, since the second film of him coming in to do one.
Yeah.
And if they ever do another one, like which there is talks that Stallone wants to do one more, if that's the case, I know he was on the short list for it, and Stallone had mentioned it publicly. that he wanted to get. He wanted to basically grab the people that had done theatrical releases in the 80s that, you know, didn't get in the other one. So we wanted to have him. We wanted to have Mark Dacascos. He wanted to have
Cynthia Rothrock.
Rothrock. He wanted to have Cynthia Rothrock. He wanted to have, you know, a lot of the semi B/C action stars. He wanted to have, what is his name? It's the guy that did Land of the Free and did a few other movies. I think you watched one of his films and said you really liked it. I'm pulling his name up because I know it's not like Speedman or something.
Scott Speedman?
I don't think it's Scott Speedman. Let me see here.
The guy from The Perfect Weapon, right?
Yeah, Jeff Speakman.
Yes, I loved him.
He did a bunch of movies in the late 80s, early 90s that were action theatrical movies, and then he did a few, you know, decent direct-to-video ones, and then disappeared. And he was on the list that he wanted to get in. So there's a bunch of actors that he wanted to sort of get in, even if it was a cameo. And I feel like we're due for another Expendables type movie, even if it's not the Expendables. Nostalgia's at an all-time high. Maybe do another American Ninja. Or how would you do it? Or would you?
I would
reboot it. Remake it?
I would reboot it. Put Dudikoff as the mentor. Kill him. Have him have the ninja magic.
So have him have the ninja magic, and do you do it where, like, do you do it where he's okay, you could do it where he is, because he's no longer in the military, he's retired or whatever. He's just one of the old guys that hangs out at the Legion or something, right? And he strikes up a relationship with one of the young privates who's been troubled. You know,
I know where I'd set it. I know where I'd set it.
Okay, I was thinking
South Korea.
You think so?
I would set it in South Korea, because then you could say he was a North Korean defector after the Second World War, or something. Like, if you wanted to have Dudikov's character was trained.
So you could even continue the story. You could continue where he left off with him. You know, we haven't seen the rest of the films, but let's say you take his character from the first film, and he works because he's got whatever issues. Maybe he's got, you know, PTSD, whatever. He works as a counselor with other young soldiers that come back, and he works with troubled kids or troubled soldiers that, you know, had a hard life, and then some sort of crazy drug dealing thing happens after he's been training them at like a dojo school, whatever. You could have a way that he's in there. It introduces his backstory. You get people to like him, and then he gets killed off. And then, you know, his student becomes the new American, finds his sword and his gear, and then, you know, goes on a revenge thing.
I would even like.
You could do it.
I'd even like to see if they could bring back the character who was the girl from the first one, the colonel's daughter. She runs a Pilates studio in California. Her name's Judy Aronson, and she's done like movies like Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. I think she was in, or part
you can't bring in, unfortunately, Steve James, who was the co-star who was his rival and then became his friend.
Yeah, I think he passed away.
He passed away in 93.
Wow.
He was only 41 back then.
That's unfortunate.
So, yeah, no, because he was in I think all of them. He was in at least the first three, I think. Yeah, he was in like the Blood Fist. But he was one of those guys that was a reliable, B-movie
supporting
action
actor. Yeah,
supporting actor. So you couldn't really have him come back. You could have, if you wanted to time in, the guy that came in for, I believe it was the third film and then stayed for the rest. That was what's his name here? I believe, because there's so many of these guys that showed up in all these, like there was like American Samurai and all these other movies that tried to capitalize on it. But if you were going to cast anything, Dudikoff is still in good enough shape that he could appear as, you know, the same character as the older version, you know, like you said, training somebody, and then something bad happens, and you know, something bad happens. He's older, tries to go in to save him, and he's just not fast enough anymore, and gets caught, sacrifices himself, and then some new kid grabs the sword and sort of trains and becomes, the new American Ninja.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would be down for it. I mean, as long as they don't kill the character, which I don't know whether he's still alive. I mean, as far as I understand, his character's still alive, because I'm just reading the summary for part 4 right now, and he's still alive, so there's no reason why he couldn't.
David Bradley, that's the guy that played the other American Ninja.
So, I think, importantly, should you watch American Ninja? Yes. However,
if you read Rotten Tomatoes, they give it a 0.
However, that being said, do not go through a monumental amount of effort. Like, don't go buy a DVD unless you get it for like less than $10.
If you see a set that has a few of them in it, pick it up. If you see it on streaming, get it. And if it's become like horrendously impossible for you to find on video, it's the kind of thing where there's probably a streaming service out there that has it as part of their licensing deal. You can just watch.
Yeah, like, it wouldn't surprise me if it's available on like Tubi or something. Like, there's got to be a legal way for you to stream it. Because obviously we don't condone piracy. But again, you may find this on eBay really cheap. You may find this on Amazon really cheap. But I think it's an enjoyable 90 minutes. It's a slice of 80s filmmaking that I don't think we'll ever truly see again, but you can see where movies have evolved from. I'm not saying it's an important movie, but it's maybe influential in what it started, or at least popularized anyway. So, Alex, what are your final thoughts on this?
It is not the crazy, fast-paced ninja movie that we've come to get used to in the last 20 years, but it is the prototype for all ninja action movies. I would say pair it with Enter the Ninja if you want to get a feel for what early 80s action films were like, and you'll notice that anything that came before those two films, vastly different in feel from what came after.
So, once again, we thank you for joining us here on Loose Cannon. What our next movie is going to be, we're not entirely sure just yet, as we typically plan these usually about 1 to 2 weeks out. And we always want to present them in just a little over 30 minutes to be bite-sized consumption. We don't want to burn ourselves up, but we also want to expand our horizons as well. So, until next time for Loose Cannon, we have been
Alex, the producer.
I've been Mike, the Birdman Dodson. Be excellent to each other. We'll catch you guys again next time, right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, that's our show. All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at ThisWeekInGeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekInGeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@ThisWeekInGeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.